What's up? Happy Saturday, October 30th, 2021. This is episode 65. Finally made it to 65. I think my last video was about 3 weeks ago, Coding While Black. Hopefully those of you who are watching me now know that I'm Dr. Kai Dupuy, and I'm an advocate for African Americans in tech, but more specifically, software developers, African American software developers, which are few and far between. And I'm enjoying this beautiful Saturday morning, man. It is lovely out here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm in Redmond, about 30 miles east of Seattle. That's where I live. Let me show you some of this background. Look at that. Just in the park about 10 minutes from my house. Trees all around behind me. Different colors. Man, it's fantastic. Folks out here on the trail walking and just taking care of themselves, right? A little darker on this side, so my light may be a little off. Anyway, for this episode, what I want to talk about is, I want to talk about confidence, and I'm going to talk about isolation. And this came up as a topic because I was giving a presentation on Thursday with my partner through my company, the Alhaven Group, and we were speaking to an employee resource group for African Americans at the Federal Reserve. And part of what I told them as a software developer, and the topic was overcoming adversity. And I talked about how in my study, one of the main points that came up was that, you know, African Americans can feel a sense, they're playing tennis over here, you may hear the ball bouncing back and forth. African Americans feel a sense of isolation. And the fact that you have an employee resource group confirms it, right? That you're usually going to be in a very small minority. And the more specific you get within the tech, the more of a minority you are probably going to be, especially as you rise up the ranks in tech to get to a software developer position. And that's been the case for me throughout my career. I was always the only black man in the room, the only black man at the conference, the only black man on the project, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And being isolated is very difficult, right? It means too that let me turn around here and go the other way. It means too that you are dealing with something that others in your group are not dealing with. They're not feeling isolated, right? They're just doing their work. I'm gonna cut on a track here, and it's a bicycle to get out the way. You're just doing your work. They're just doing their work. You're trying to do your work while you grapple with feelings of isolation and being the only one and thinking you may not fit in and having to always prove yourself, and stereotypes and imposter syndrome and all these things that are generated from isolation, or partly generated from isolation. Only one on the team. I know many people who have done this, who've gone to their careers and they couldn't deal with that isolation, and so they left corporate America. There's nothing wrong with that. But isolation in these positions is real. And when asked how did I overcome that, and I had a lot of practice with it because I was the same way in high school and college. I went to a college in San Antonio, Texas, Trinity University, where it was 1% minority. Not 1% black. They added up all the minorities and it was 1% minority. When I was taking my STEM classes in high school, it was me and one other brother who went on to be an engineer. Shout out to David Lott. And so I had a lot of practice with being isolated. But the number one thing that I would say that helped me overcome that was building my sense of confidence, right? And when I say confidence, I don't mean confidence in terms of whether I could do the work or not. I mean confidence as a black man, because that's what you're in there as, and that's what they see you as a black man. And you have to have a sense of self that generates the confidence. And so what I shared with those folks at the Federal Reserve was how that happened for me was through reading. And I don't know if we still call it Black history, but I spent a great deal of time, money, resources, and years reading Black history, filling in the gaps, finding out what we have contributed to society, finding out all those who worked in STEM who didn't get credit for the work that they did. Lewis Latimer, Katherine Johnson, and going beyond America with my studies in terms of history and seeing what we contributed as Africans to the contribution of civilization and understanding what had happened to us. And so all of that knowledge, that gave me a sense of self and pride and strength. And I held my head up high as a black man. And it started with a book that I shared with those folks at the Federal Reserve, the Autobiography of Malcolm X. And after I told this story to them, they said, Dr. Kai, do you have a book list? And of course I have a book list. And so I gave them a book list, and it's an old list from books that I read back in the day. There are newer books out now, but none of them top the Autobiography of Malcolm X, because the Autobiography of Malcolm X not only talks about being a black man, he becomes the exemplar for transformation. He becomes where the confidence was built from, because he was someone who went from the streets to being one of the top leaders of the 21st century for African Americans, recognized as a global icon. And so, and one of my favorite quotes by him is, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. And that's exactly what I did. I read his book. I read every other book written about him. And in the Autobiography of Malcolm X, he talked about all the books that he read that gave him this knowledge. And I read all of those books. And it put me on a mission to read. I developed a voracious reading habit. Hundreds of books, hundreds of dollars over the years. There's no book on black history that I haven't read. I'm very well versed in it. And that gave me the confidence that when I went into a room and someone spoke to me from a perspective of my being black and intimating something about inferiority, oh, no. I was the wrong person for that. And many of them found out. I don't do that anymore, because I think I carry myself with an air that I don't get challenged very often in terms of that. And also times have changed somewhat. And I don't run into those kind of folks as readily as I used to. But young people coming up, if you're dealing with those kinds of thoughts, if you're feeling isolated, start reading. And I was the very first book, and I tell this to every young brother that I talk to, including my son, read the Autobiography of Malcolm X. Back then I was going to black bookstores. They don't really exist anymore, but you can get all this stuff online. Autobiography of Malcolm X, Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro, Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James, anything by Cheikh Anta Diop, From the Browder File. I can go on and on and on with these books. From Slavery to Freedom, John Hope Franklin, anything by Naeem Akbar. Get your read on. Once again, it's your boy, Dr. Kai Dupuy, Coding While Black, episode 65. Peace and blessings.